Hey, you're watching Guitar Magic. Today we've got an interview with Adam Miller from Australia. He has 10 albums under his own name, appearances with folks like Tommy Emmanuel, Joey Landreth, Josh Smith, Mason Stoops, Adam Levy, and others. He's played all kinds of big music festivals. He's had press in every major guitar publication. He has his own series of courses on TrueFire. I know you're going to love this interview. You just got to keep on watching. Hey, Adam. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really good this time, man.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Where are you and what time is it?
I am in Newcastle, Australia. It's the east coast of Australia, and it's 11 a.m.
Okay.
On a Friday.
All right. I'm in Santa Barbara, California in my van, and it is about 6 o'clock p.m. on a Thursday.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I'm really glad to get some time to talk with you. I've met you a few times at various trade shows and whatnot, but it's really, really a treat to get to ask you some questions and let you share some stuff with the audience out there.
It's awesome, man. Should we, I'm going to mention that we have done this podcast before a long time ago, and it was really depressing because I was back in lockdown.
You were in lockdown. I wasn't going anywhere because although I wasn't as locked down, the world was just a shit mess. Yeah. And it was a strange time.
Yeah. So it ended up a really strange interview, I think. So I'm stoked we get to do this again.
Yeah, me too. Although I will say the last time we spoke, we were talking about your album Unify, which is a killer album. And I encourage everyone to go check it out. But now you have a new album out, and we'll get talking.
I do. Yeah.
We'll get to talk about that here this time. I guess I'll start at the beginning. Where did you really get started with music? What was the beginning for you?
The absolute beginning was playing the organ, like the Yamaha, like not a cool Hammond organ, like in the late 80s, like a Yamaha organ that, has 5 different drum beats you can do.
Yeah.
It all sound like, which is like actually what cool hipster bands use as the base of their tracks now. But, at the time wasn't cool. So I started learning that when I was like 4 years old. I got sent to those lessons. And the cool thing with that, the method I learned was called the Yamaha method. And it was very ear-based and ear training as opposed to reading music. And so it kind of set me up in that way. And then my father had a guitar. We've lost the camera in the background, man.
Yeah, hold on.
Technical issues, right? Yeah. Go, Corey.
Right, well, we're just going to turn that off.
All right.
Lovely. So you were saying ear-based set you up for some kind of success there.
Yeah. And so, my father had a guitar. He can't really play at all. He had to do it when, going through teachers college, and I just picked it up and it made sense to me straight away. Like instead of learning chords, it was all pre-internet, so I didn't have access to tabs or anything like that at that stage, but I just worked out where all the notes were. I just worked out up each string. I was like, oh, here's the keyboard up each string. Here's the white and black notes. And so from the very start of playing guitar, I could tell you where every note was on the fretboard, which is strange, but that's how I approached it from the beginning and sort of saw it straight away. So,
How old were you at that time?
Like 9.
9. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, had it really kicked in yet? The guitar was cool, or did that come later?
Actually, talking about cool, I think I thought it was too cool for me to play. So I was a little strange about it. Even then I was like, I'm not cool. I can't play guitar. It just sort of gravitated on me, and it was a good time. Like, so that was, late 80s, early 90s. And so it was there was lots of guitar on the radio everywhere still, and sweet solos and things to learn and lots of things happening. So it was a great time to pick up the instrument.
Yeah. And then, I mean, over time you pursued and developed a style that I think a lot of guitar players don't try to do because it's really hard. But I mean, you really have, I don't know how to define it exactly, but it's in the finger style vein, a lot of bass, comping chords and melody all at the same time.
Yeah. So the big thing for me early on was that in that time period when I was 9, 10 years old, this Australian guitar player just got signed to a major label in Australia and started releasing albums by the name of Tommy Emmanuel. And so he was on the TV all the time, and my mum just bought me a cassette of a Tommy Emmanuel album. And I thought it was awesome because in my head then I sounded exactly the same because we didn't sing. And because the music I was like, things like, I remember like loving the Billy Joel Stormfront album. It was actually the first concert I ever went to was that concert. But, I couldn't sing along to Billy Joel at 10 years old because and so when I got this Tommy Emmanuel thing, it was the first instrumental music I'd ever heard. I hadn't, heard anything else before that. And so I just sounded exactly the same. So I just started to learn all those things by ear off the cassettes and, without realizing the difficulty in it, just doing it because I loved it. So,
yeah, I was going to ask you, what even made you think you could do it?
Well, just because it was there. I don't know. Like it was that, and it wasn't right. It was like, in those days, Tommy was actually mainly playing electric guitar. His albums were predominantly Telecaster and electric with a band rather than the solo acoustic thing now. But I remember on that first album is his arrangement of Blue Moon that he still plays. And, I worked out bits of the walking bass line that goes underneath it, but not all of it. It was like sort of disjointed, but it was enough that to me it sounded exactly the same then. I was like, oh yeah, I can play this song. Cool.
Close enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great grounding for, being, out of my depth very early.
I mean, it sounds like you were you accepted with yourself that you sounded pretty good. Did the playing come easy to you? I mean, you said you were already just sort of able to make sense of the guitar straight away. But did you have some other form of discipline in your life that made you think that you could accomplish things with work, or it was just a natural inclination to do it?
It was just that natural thing to play. Performing wasn't a natural thing for me, but definitely just playing the guitar, and I just did it because I loved it. So I just get home from school and put on a cassette and just jam with it for 3 hours every night. It was it wasn't, and I think because of that early ear training, I was able to pick up things and work them out from listening rather than relying on getting music for things or being shown it.
It's a bit of an aside, but I'm really surprised at how much guitar instruction and guitar method does not involve the ears. There's a lot out there that doesn't, it kind of puts notes under your hands and says, play these notes. It doesn't say, hear these notes and figure them out.
I've never thought about that, man. I think I'm even guilty of that in my own like online lessons and things, that I'm not really giving enough importance to the ear. But I think at that point then you're in a video, so the whole idea is that people can see it rather than have to but no, it definitely is a thing. And when I'm working with one-on-one students and taught a lot in the past, it's that thing of like, well, go home and work it out. Don't race to the internet and find a tab for it or a chord chart. Even just sit there with it and listen.
I think there's some value to struggling to learn it. I think the learning happens a little bit in the struggle.
Totally. And then, I think that's how you develop a sound as well beyond that, because and that's something it's part of my laziness, but it's also sort of a good thing where, like if I couldn't play something that way, I'd just work out some other way to play it or something else to go in that gap. Like if I couldn't work out how a certain run went, then I wouldn't, I've never really pained myself over getting it exactly. It'd be like, oh, well, I'll just do this instead. And then it ends up that anything I've played becomes my own arrangement because I'm, I say lazy, but let's say because I was finding creative ways to make the music suit what I do better.
You're creatively efficient.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, anyway, I mean, I know you had your playing together at a pretty early age, and I think you were finding yourself on pretty big stages at a relatively young age. If I'm not mistaken, one of your first big performances was opening for Tommy Emmanuel.
The first time I did a solo guitar concert was that. Yeah. I think I was 19 at the time, which isn't young by today's standards, but yeah.
Pretty young. How
A
did that
while
come?
ago.
How did that come about?
I asked. That was it. I sent an email to Tommy Emmanuel's manager at the time, the great Gina Mendello, who does lots of musicians around the world now. But yeah, I just found her email address and said, "Oh, I see he's coming to Newcastle again, finally," because Tommy had moved overseas at that point, and I'd love to open the show. And they just said yes.
That sounds great. Then did you have material already, or
Nope.
was that?
Nope, no
you
idea.
didn't?
No, I didn't have. I had a couple of songs of solo guitar things, but I hadn't really developed. I'd never played. There was no opportunity for me to perform that sort of thing. You know, like through high school, I maybe played one or two songs at a school showcase night or something. But the town I lived in, there was no acoustic music. Definitely wasn't a thing. It was very much a rock and roll town. So I'd already been playing rock music in bands, but not with never a solo guitar thing. So
Wow.
I actually wrote several pieces and developed arrangements. And actually, the issue was at the time, most of the pieces I knew to play on solo guitar were Tommy Emmanuel's, so I couldn't play those. That was the main issue. I had to do, I think I had 6 to 8 weeks from memory. I know it wasn't long before the show, and it was hard because it was also at the university. The concert was in the concert hall of the university I was actually going to at the time.
Oh, wow.
So I was in like first year music at that university and then having to do this huge concert there. So yeah.
That's amazing. And how did it go? Do you remember, or is it just a blur?
I remember it was pretty good, like from the point of view of a performance.
Right.
I was actually talking about it with high school students yesterday, funnily enough. It came up, I was doing a masterclass at a high school, but it like from a performance point of view, it went well. I held myself. The playing probably wasn't great. I remember I played a very old song of Tommy Emmanuel's that I found out afterwards that he never, because I checked, I was like, he's not going to play this song. And he really only ever played it once in the studio. And I remember getting off stage after my set and him then saying, "Oh, this is how you actually play that song." Because once again, I just learned a version of it. It wasn't, I hadn't labored over getting everything exact, but
creative efficiency strikes again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's an amazing story. I mean, just start big, why don't you? And then I guess I think a handful of years later, you found yourself in New York, and somehow you wound up on the stage with Les Paul. Is that?
Yeah, that's a pretty dumb story. That's great.
Tell me how that happened. What's going on here? How old were you at that point, and how did that go down?
Like late 20s, like maybe, I don't know, 26 something. It was actually my first trip ever. Well, my first trip to the US by myself. I'd been back when I was a kid to like Disneyland and things with my parents, but it was the first time traveling overseas by myself. And I went for a long time, and it was, I don't know, I think that stuff was scarier back then when you didn't have a phone and you didn't have things and you had to organize things in advance. So I was in New York. Speaking once again of like sort of Gina Mendello and the Tommy Emmanuel connection, I tried to actually organize it with her to be able to maybe go and meet Les Paul or play or whatever. And because it was like internet cafes and things and people didn't check their email every 3 seconds, I don't think it never actually happened. The emails didn't go through and nothing happened. So I turned up to the gig anyway. I'd been hanging out at Rudy's Music through the day, like the great guitar store there, and with this dear friend now, Gordon French, who ran the acoustic department there. And I kind of went, because I was staying in a hostel, I was like, I don't really want to leave my guitar in the hostel. Do you think if I turn up to a gig in New York, will they let me in with a guitar? And he said, it's fine. Everyone takes guitars for Les to sign, and that's cool. So I turn up, go to the thing, and I'm like, I'd like a ticket. and they said, "Oh, it's sold out tonight." And it didn't even occur to me that it sells out weeks in advance. And so then I went, "Oh, no, I'm actually one of the guest artists tonight. That's why I have my guitar here," as a joke. And they said, "Okay." And they took me downstairs and backstage. And Les was there, and he says, "Oh, who are you, son?" And I'm like, Adam, I'm from Australia. I played with Tommy Emmanuel a bit." And he said, "Well, what are we playing tonight?" And so I did 2 shows with Les after that.
I just talked your way into it.
Just talked my way into it. It was, I don't know how I did that. That's not my personality at all, but it just happened. So it was amazing.
What a great story. I mean, at that time, by then you were probably pretty darn accomplished, but as you were coming up, did you ever feel like you were over your head in these situations?
Well, that one. And at that time, like I was borderline going, okay, maybe it's time to just get a real job and like look at doing other things. And having never played internationally, and even YouTube was in its infancy then. It wasn't really the thing. So there wasn't that. There was, I think MySpace existed, but there wasn't social media to get things out into the world unless you already had agents and record companies and things. And so to be on that stage and realizing I could sort of hold my own in that regards in New York City, later reminded on Broadway, playing with the guy, like that gave me a kick to like sort of come home and really start to pursue everything, like performing internationally and getting my own albums done. Because at that stage I was doing predominantly session playing for other bands and other artists.
Yeah. It's such a wild story.
It's such a cool story. I'm so stoked that it is mine, but I laugh at myself whenever I hear it again. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, just as a little background, a little context, you kind of came onto my radar in the early 2000s. I was heavy into Charlie Hunter at the time, and you kept popping up. I think he had a chat board, and you kept popping up in his chat board. I think probably you were a fan back then, like I was.
Oh, exactly. Totally, man.
I always sort of thought Charlie was like some supernatural human and no one else could get into his musical lane. And I didn't feel that bad about myself that I couldn't play his tunes, sort of like, well, the guy, he's superhuman, like no one can do this.
Yeah.
And then you came along and I started to hear clips of you playing, and you were just wrecking the guitar, comping the bass and the chords and the melody. And I thought to myself, oh shit, Adam can do this. This isn't impossible. He can do this, which made me so proud of you and also made me so embarrassed for myself. But, then I'm not sure how it happened. Maybe you became friends with Charlie. At some point I saw you had an instrument of Charlie's. And now, like 20 years later, after like 8 albums or something of your own, is it your first label release?
Yeah, it is actually in reality. Yeah.
It's on Side Hustle Records, which is Charlie Hunter's label.
Yeah.
Which to me just blows my mind. I mean, congratulations. I guess if you work hard, you can enter the circle with your heroes. But how does this feel? Like, what is your connection to Charlie, and are you friends, or
well,
how did this all come together?
Crazier about that Les Paul story is that I met Charlie the day before that.
Oh, really?
And so this is like probably a more meaningful story to me than the next day, but the next one has, a crazier context. But, Charlie hadn't toured in Australia since the mid 90s. I was underage. I couldn't go to his gig. I didn't know who he was at the time. So the only way I could go and see Charlie was to come to the US. And that was one of my big things on that first trip I did, was there were certain guitarists I wanted to see play in real life finally. And so I caught a bus I was in New York for a couple of days. And then Charlie played this very small little festival, 40 minutes drive outside of Rochester, New York. So I caught a Greyhound bus to Rochester, like 9 hours or something that it takes to go to this gig and see it. And it was a crazy weekend. My bag got taken off the bus by someone else, so I didn't have any clothes. I had a backpack. I had my guitar underneath, but someone had mistaken my bag. So I turned up. I had to, go and buy clothes that day from somewhere.
Oof.
It was just this crazy time. And I went to this festival, and Charlie's Trio was the headline, and it was one of the greatest gigs I've ever seen in my life till this day. It was amazing. And I took an early album and gave it to Charlie and was like, hey man, I'm a massive fan. I'm from Australia. Specifically come to see you. There's a song on this album like I wrote in dedication to you years ago. I'd love you to have it. And he was like, yeah, oh, cool, great. And I kind of just left it as that. Was like, thank you for your influence. Good day to you, sir.
Yeah.
And then I turned around and I was like, I don't know how I'm getting back to my hotel. It's 45 minutes. There's no cell phone coverage at the where the festival is. And Charlie looks at me and he goes, man, did you drive here? How on earth did you get here? And I'm like, I caught a taxi. And it was just like this young, naive thing I did. And he's like, where are you staying? And I said, oh, here. He's like, we're on that same street. I'll give you a ride back. And so I went out to dinner with him and the guys in the band. And yeah, that sort of started it. And then over, the next several years of traveling to the US and around, we became friends. So yeah, but that story is more meaningful to me in that time. It was just this crazy sort of thing. So it was Charlie Hunter one day and then Les Paul the next day.
Oh my gosh.
And so I got into Charlie early 2000s through John Mayer. I didn't know who Charlie was. I'd never heard of him. And I saw John Mayer with this fan fret.
Right. I remember
guitar,
that. Yeah.
Which was his first signature model. Before he had a Martin or a Fender, he had a Novak's fan fret signature guitar. And I saw him reference that this song was a ripoff of Charlie Hunter. And I'm like, well, who's that guy? And then it was that thing of, wow, like that's, improvisation, fingerstyle improvisation is possible. It sort of made that reality. So, it was crazy. Just managed to, and then that week I bought a Strat from, like a cheap pawn shop and, ripped off, put 2 bass strings on it, stereoed the pickups and did a gig the next weekend with a drummer and a sax player because I was so excited about it. Eventually bought one of the 8-string Novaxes, and then the guitar I currently have is one of Charlie's old ones, a Trowget. Yeah. So that's sort of how it is. And we've just become friends over time, and his label is this great, the idea is to sort of create this family of artists that all have a similar idea and maybe similar vision, and that the label can somehow cut through all the stuff going on these days and the amount of music released. And, it's just a sweet little family run thing, and it's awesome to be a part of it.
Wow. Did you have, I guess we should transition. Let's talk about your newest album a little bit. Yeah. Beyond Reason.
Yes, that's it.
I've listened to it top to bottom. It's great. As always, your playing is fantastic. The tunes are catchy and the production is really lush and delicious, which I don't recall your previous albums having almost, I don't know what the word is, that produced of a sound. Like it's really something. And at some points I feel like you're leaning into your pop sensibilities more than I've heard. Like you have some vocal hooks and some ambient guitar sounds and like layered anthem guitar sounds. I mean, it sounds huge. And, based on what I heard, it sounds like you're sort of stretching into new areas. And I guess I want to ask you, what was the concept guiding this album for you? Where was this coming from?
Well, it was, to start with, I just wrote lots and lots of songs the last few years, 40, 50 defined, finished pieces. And it was sort of around the time we did our last interview you know, went back into lockdown in Australia, and I saw that the rest of the world was not in lockdown and doing things, and it was taking its toll on me. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna just make some music while we're here. And Joel Gottschalk, bass player, and Justin Glasgow in LA, they were able to like be in the same room together. They were the same guys that played on Unify, and they're great friends. And so I basically I knew they could be in a room together. And so I picked a bunch of songs that didn't really need to be played live together. They were these sort of strange singer-songwritery almost things that I'd been writing. And so, yeah, I got them in for a remote session. It was over Zoom like we are now, set up in a little triangle in Justin's studio in LA. So, you know, drums, bass, then me, but I was a MacBook screen.
Okay.
Sort of guiding them through things with a, 4-second time delay or whatever. It was crazy.
And you were able to navigate all that technology and make it happen?
We made it, like Justin had set up his studio really amazing to send that stuff across. And and then I sort of worked out what the time lag was between if I made a signal when they would see it. So I, usually had to be 2 bars ahead signaling something. And that's sort of how it came about, the idea that these were more produced songs and just this, little, I don't know. It was, that was always the idea of sort of building it up, and that the guitar parts weren't necessarily the one thing to play everything the way I've done in the past, where because I have this facility to play multiple parts, I usually do. And so, most of my things previously probably could be 2 or 3 guitar players, but I jam it into one part.
Right.
But with this album, I specifically left it and tried to, have, especially like the acoustic guitar thing, because I found myself just playing so much strumming acoustic guitar the last couple of years and really loving that sound. So I wanted to have that, sort of, it is the base of a few songs. So yeah.
So I mean, I was just listening to it. I mean, when you're not trying to play everything all on your own, it sort of lends a different sensibility to what's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, I really was hearing that. I'm not sure how to say this, so maybe I'll get to edit it in post, but it really did. It sounded like you were writing tunes that were able to be spread out and produced. And
the main thing was there were 2 aspects of it. I wasn't trying to record an album that I knew I could easily reproduce live. So it wasn't like in a trio, like without having another guitar player or another 3 guitar players. And the idea that when I write in the past, a lot of it was so that I could play new material at a gig, maybe that night. So I would write pieces that would be very simple on paper and very easily for bass and drums to translate off me playing like an 8-bar intro. So I could play something, the drummer would be able to go, oh yeah, that's going to be what the groove is. The chart was very simple. And then the songs could be transformed into something way beyond that chart quite easily. Whereas with this, I had this very specific idea of how the songs go and where accents were. And so, that's sort of what's happened with it, that these songs have much more of a, on paper, a pop format, even like in the way the chart is written. And there's less room for improvisation and more specific things that have to happen at different times.
Yeah. Well, I have to say it's not what I'm used to hearing from you, but it's beautiful. And it's really interesting to hear you stretch in those ways. I mean, do you think do you think it gave you any sort of room for musical growth that the old way of playing or the old way of writing didn't provide?
It definitely allowed me to do different things like that. Obviously, like it was sort of the adventure of, I love actually like using the guitar as layers and having different guitar sounds and different ideas that are played on guitar to create this picture. I know I have played keys on one or two tracks on this, but the majority of the sounds come from a guitar, and I love that sort of thing of going, oh wow, is that a guitar? That's cool.
Yeah,
because I love hearing that on other records. So that was really fun to do. And from a writing point of view, I guess I'm not afraid to do things like this maybe again in the future and create things this way. And some of the songs were even not really written when they were recorded. There were a few that I basically got the guys to play 16 bars of this and then 16 bars of this in a slightly different groove, and then I constructed the songs later in software. So just editing them together and then creating this whole mess.
Musical Legos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Would you be willing to try and play through one of your tunes?
Yeah,
some of it.
Sure, man. Yeah.
That tune, Old Friend.
Yeah.
Crushes me, man. It's so beautiful. And I bet it might lend itself to playing as one person.
Well, I've just done the first sort of tour show of the new album, so I'm getting used to playing everything now as a trio and, even solo and that sort of thing. But so Old Friend definitely has heavy older influences. Like musical influences, and I kind of wanted it to sound that way, and it's there's no sort of out there chords really. Well, there kind of is, but anyway, I'll play the melody and the in my head it's the verse, pre-chorus, chorus, so that's what it's going to be. So that's the first verse, pre-chorus, chorus, and post-chorus. There's a lot of sections, I guess.
It's a beautiful tune, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I encourage everyone out there who's watching this. There will be links to see all this in the show notes down below. Please go check it out. Purchase a copy. Support a man. Awesome. Are you gonna tour this album, or
I'm hoping to. Yeah, just working out all the getting back into the whole international travel thing again. So, just sorting out the visas and all those complicated things that are boring, but are the things I need to be able to.
They're part of your reality.
Yeah. So, hopefully I'm touring Australia at the moment, which isn't much. Like, Australia's huge and there's only a few major cities. So it's kind of just a show a week. I'm not really going on the road, but I'm just flying somewhere, flying back. But it'll be interesting because it's a different band for every show. So it'll be interesting to see how we get through these songs at each time, because they just have all these weird little twists and turns that don't quite translate as easily as most of my old material.
Yeah. So I know you have a pretty streamlined guitar collection. Everything you have seems to serve a purpose, and it seems to do it well. I was wondering, can you just tell me about what is it you have in your collection? And more importantly, why do you have that in your collection?
Ooh, yeah, there's too much probably at
Yeah.
the moment.
Give me the
Well,
highlights. Yeah.
yeah. We'll start with the one in my hand, I guess, because a lot of the new record was actually played on this, which is strange that the singer-songwriter album is played mainly on an archtop, essentially jazz guitar thing. But this is just a Collings East Side, and I got it, mid 2020. And what I loved about it was that the acoustic sound of it is just quiet. We moved into an apartment, so I can get this beautiful, I don't know, like this is it just acoustically now through this mic. So, and it just has this, really inspiring thing about it. So, and I've always loved the archtop in between acoustic and electric sound. So, and then you add the amp in. And even, the humbucker in it is not a normal sort of, it's a very bright sounding humbucker. It's a Ron Ellis signature pickup, and it's like, so yeah, this is a guitar I play a lot, most of the time at home. And, if the gig's not too loud, then I'll sort of play that.
Yeah.
Then I've also got, the guitar most people have seen me with is the Nick Huber.
Yeah.
Rietbergen, with the Californian redwood top and gold foils. And so that's it is my signature guitar, and that thing is just a beast. And it's it looks like a sort of a 335, but in reality it's sort of it's a giant Telecaster really, because it's still 25.5-inch scale. The gold foil's a single coil, and that's sort of more how I see it in that vein. And it's a cool guitar once again, because I guess that's the thing about most of my things. They're all very versatile. They're strange, specific guitars that most people wouldn't play. But for me, they're all these things I could take and do any gig on.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like.
And I think, you travel a lot. So, you
Yeah.
have to hop on a plane to tour your own continent. You
Yeah,
have to hop on a
exactly.
plane to come to the States. You can't bring
Yeah.
everything.
You cannot bring everything. So it's always a little debate of what's going to go on the road. And, in Australia, you can't take a guitar on board ever. Like, you have to check guitars. There's no gate check. So traveling with multiple instruments is pretty hard. So you're always like just going, okay, well, what am I going to take, and what guitar has the best case?
Yeah. Very pragmatic. Yeah.
Yeah. It's to sort of survive it. And, and then, like, I've got a parts caster telly that I built many years ago that would sort of became this foundation for my electric sound of things being a little bit left of center. And so it's like a thin line with a solid rosewood neck, and like the Firebird mini humbucker pickup in the neck, which is a big part of its sound. And and then a bunch of great acoustic guitars, like the Michael Greenfield Koa, which is all over this album. And then I've got a small body Collings, which is all over this album as well. Just more in the background, obviously, but just that bit of recording over the last year of those acoustic guitar things has got me really excited about doing more solo acoustic stuff again. So those guitars will probably come more into the fore over the next little while, I'd say too.
If you had sort of, how can I phrase this? If you were more geographically determined in one place and you didn't have to travel as far to do gigs, do you think you would pick different guitars? Do you think you would fall in love with different things, or is this just your...
No, these were always, this idea of doing it is just sort of, I think, that doesn't influence the decision at all. If I would love to take more guitars on the road. I do like the idea, when I play at home, which I do quite a bit, I will turn up to gigs with 3-4 guitars. I've never turned up with 5, I don't think. But yeah, I will often do 3 or 4. But what ends up happening is that you pick up the first guitar you play, and then I end up just doing most of the gig on that, because I don't think about changing the guitar between songs, or it's too hard.
Yeah.
Or there's not enough room, and I'm just going to dent things and bump them and knock them over. So yeah.
I'll leave I'll leave it to other guitar shows and gear shows to geek out on your tone. But I
Yeah.
will say the edge of breakup tones that you were getting on the tune "Aging," and also
Mm.
those crazy spitting fuzz tones on the second track. I forget the name
Oh
of that
yeah,
one.
seemed like a good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seemed like a good idea. How are you getting those tones? I mean,
Yeah, so like, so all of this album was recorded in the room I'm in right now,
uh,
which is our apartment. I still mic up amps. I don't do any direct sort of things, but I do play pretty quiet. So the breakup sort of things are all coming from pedals, and I think on this album, like there were like 3 overdrives I used, and they like run them so low gain, it's ridiculous. Like so. It would have been like a Free the Tone SOV2 on some things, the Vemaram Janray, and the Nordvang custom overdrive. And, you know, honestly, anyone else, I can switch them all on. They'll sound exactly the same. But to me, like they all have this slight different feel. So that's why different ones happen at different times. But yeah, and so I always am just working on how to, because I can never turn my amp up loud enough to record it breaking up, and I'm so used to playing at low volumes that I kind of I'm not a big fan of that sound anyway. I like all my amps at quieter volumes. There's just this threshold where I think it sounds great, and then I get past it, and I'm like, ooh, it's a bit too much and a bit too harsh now. So. I'm always creating those sort of things with pedals at home, and the fuzz tone is the Vemaram, the Josh Smith pedal, the Myriad, which is ridiculous. Like it's so hard to control at home volumes because it basically the volume goes from 0 to 1,000 as soon as you twist the volume knob. So but it's great to, you know, it's really easy to fine tune into those dying sort of fuzz tones, like that where things sort of break down. And, you know, that whole song, that was a song that basically was edited and constructed in my studio here after the guys played various bits and pieces for me. And so, yeah, I always had this idea of it going from, and most of the guitar track is this guitar, the like arch top. And I honestly can't remember, but even that fuzz solo might be still this guitar.
really?
I can't quite remember. Yeah, in the end, just because it is so stupid and fun. It might be this, it might be my telly, but that's the thing. Like my guitars seem
Your
to all sound the
versatility,
same.
yeah.
Yeah. So that was a fun thing to get to do because like, well, then that song sort of has 2 solos, and then the first solo is my concert classical guitar, which I've never recorded before, but like I only really ever just play for myself. And so to finally get to record that guitar and then followed by the craziest fuzz sound I've ever recorded was really fun.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, well, like I said, I'm sure other gear shows will do a better deep dive on that stuff. But those tones in particular, they knock me out. I always love your clean tone or cleanish tones.
Yeah,
but that's more of what I know about you. So
I think like even Unify is the same approach. There's pretty much an overdrive pedal on every song, and it's just the amount I dig into the thing.
Yeah.
And so everything I use is very touch sensitive in that way that I can have that power through my attack, which I think just, you know, comes from the acoustic guitar background where you can like learn to play an acoustic where you get, in my head, it's overdriven all of a sudden by how much you attack it. And I've just always dug that.
Yeah. You know, at the risk of, you know, veering way off course, maybe getting esoteric or existential or something, I'm just curious, the guitar's a big piece of your life. I know that, but what does the guitar mean to you? What role does it play in your story?
Well, it's pretty major. It's probably too major in reality. And it's like, it's a part of my everyday life. I pick up the guitar every morning pretty much, or at least every day, but usually, you know, in the morning when I wake up, have breakfast, cup of tea, I have a guitar in my hand. Not playing anything particularly interesting. It's usually just G chords and C chords because I like the sound of them. And then, you know, that might develop into a Frizzell sort of thing. It just makes me happy. It's just, yeah, part of my world. You know, it's, you know, I think I've become a very effective communicator on it, of emotion and even language with the way I write and play. And so, yeah, it's well, it's too much of my life, but it's awesome. Yeah.
Do you feel like you've had to sacrifice other things in your life to keep guitar as in focus as you have?
Ooh, well, most definitely, especially from the point of view of a career. Yeah. There's a lot of sacrifice there. Yeah. Yeah.
I almost want to ask you what you sacrificed, but it might be too personal.
Well, you know, it's just all the normal things, like you know, owning real estate and things, like, you know, like just all the normal sort of creature comfort sort of things that people tend to have by the time they're in their 40s.
Yeah.
And lifestyle things as well, you know, my ability to go out and do things, or it's just there's a lot of and that's just, I think, the arts industry sacrifice as well, you know. When you're in that world, it's just a different path to take. So you find yourself distanced from others in the world that aren't taking that path a lot of the time.
Yeah. Do you ever feel crazy for pursuing it, or do you feel like you can justify it to yourself? You said it makes you happy. Do you feel reconciled with it?
It goes from day to day, you know. That's a big, probably the idea of the album title as well, of this album. It's like beyond reason that I should be doing this, or why would I do this? And it's beyond reason that I still get to do this, you know, and that this is my life. So it's like not something, you know, like going back to when I was a kid and started, it wasn't something I aspired to. It wasn't like, oh, I'll be a professional musician. I was like, I kind of always thought, by the time I'd been playing guitar for a long time, that I'd always be playing guitar, but I didn't think it would be my life. It just sort of took over. It was that thing of like, oh, I didn't have a choice anymore. I had to drop out of the other things I was studying at university because I didn't have time to go.
It took over. I think that's
that's sort of how it happened.
Well, you know, let me ask, what's next on the horizon for you? Actually, I was curious. A couple of years ago, it seemed like you were getting caught between possibly moving to the States, and then for obvious reasons that didn't work out and you got locked down and all that. But what's next for you? And are you going to stay in Australia, or have you figured out what your direction is now?
My idea is probably to be here. I think the world has changed significantly in the last few years, and the ability to at least for me, where I'm at in my world, to live in a different country is a little bit trickier than it used to be. And, you know, the reality of visas and that sort of thing is hard. Even the visa I had for the US back then is expired now. So I'm trying to make that work again and get that happening. So, but it's definitely, the plan is to be out and touring through the rest of the year, hopefully be back in the States in the not too distant future on the road and playing as much as I can, and hoping to get back, especially to like Europe and the UK, which I haven't been to for like, I think it's 5 or 6 years now. So I'm very keen to do that. And then Japan and all those things, and just to, sort of keep music happening, I guess, and try to make it all work. But there's no, you know, I wish I had very long-term plans, but unfortunately at the moment things are still so much in limbo that everything's a few weeks ahead of me, and just trying to make it all work. But that's sort of the rough idea.
I don't know how you pull it off, but I want to encourage you to keep trying to pull it off, because
Thanks,
the world gets a lot of great music because you make it. So
thanks, man.
Thanks for what you do, and thanks for taking the risks to pursue it. And, you know, there's an audience, maybe a small audience of dorky guys like me. I don't know, but there's an audience of people out there that.
Well,
that
that's
care.
sort of the great thing about the industry now, and that's sort of how it works, is that it doesn't require huge amounts of people to make it work. It, you know, a few dedicated ones will, and yeah, that's sort of what's magical about it. And the whole thing, you know, I realized early on, because I had done, you know, sort of massive, you know, like stadium shows playing for different artists, but I really loved, the thing I loved about touring and playing was meeting people and talking to people and hearing their stories, and, you know, just how it ends up becoming, yeah, just these little familiar places all over the world. Like there's so many places that I go to even still, because I, you know, managed to do a US tour for a month in August last year, just going back to these places and going, oh, wow, like this feels so familiar to me, like, or homely even, like Los Angeles still feels very much like home. New York, despite the fact it changed quite a bit, by the time I'd got over a couple of them, you know, the strange things that had changed, I was like, oh no, this is all very familiar, and it doesn't, and that's an incredible thing to sort of go and do that, and then be able to share music with people is insane. And so
yeah well, I think guitar and music, it connects people, and there's a lot of people who think about the gear and the knobs and the how do you play that, but I think at the end of the day it's pretty overpowering how it connects people. And thanks for your part.
Yeah,
what you do
exactly.
there. Yeah,
thanks, man. Thank you.
Well, I think we should wrap it up here. Where should people find out the most up-to-date information about you? Are you active on the social medias?
All the social medias. So the website is adamiller.com.au. You have to add the little Australian bit at the end, because .com for some reason still redirects, I think, to whitehouse.gov. I don't know why.
Okay.
I don't know who owns it, but I can't buy it for whatever reason. And then, yeah, Instagram is probably the one I'm most active on, which is Adam Miller Guitar, and it's usually Adam Miller Guitar or Adam Miller Music, depending on who was already taken the very common name there, because there's multiple Adam Millers.
Yeah,
even in the music industry, so we're always juggling that. But yeah, all those things you can find me on.
Okay, I'll provide links to all that in the notes below. Well, hey, I'm going to stop recording here. If you want to hang around for just one more second, we can chat. But thanks for coming on the show, and I really appreciate your time. And I hope to do it again. And I'm going to keep listening to your album, man.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm so glad you watched to the end. Special thanks to Adam for coming on the show. Please do look at the links in the description below so you can buy his album and learn more about him. If you believe in guitar magic like I do, please feel free to stick a few bucks in the tip jar or visit the merch store. And if you haven't subscribed by now, I don't know what you're waiting for. Can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye for now.